Let's begin. Let's dedicate the shir Louis Nishmat. Your mother-in-law, what was her?
As a Mashabat Yitzchak.
Masha Bas Yitzhak. And to the Refuah Shlema, my mother, Shlema Leah Bas Raphael, who is making progress, recovering
Baruch
from
Hashem.
fall a few weeks ago. And for the hostages to be released immediately, for the protection of our soldiers, for the protection of Am Yisrael, and for all of the innocents.
Amen.
So with that, good to see everybody. Let's begin. Yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna turn my camera off for like the first few minutes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. That's fine. Okay. Oh, actually, you know what? This week I decided, since I brought this up last week, this is going to be a very short digression. But I mentioned this last week. I thought I'll start from here because this was a kind of a parallel idea. We were talking about the partial birth of an animal, and I mentioned that there's a parallel to this with humans. So the Mishnah that I was referring to is here in Ohalot. Ohalot deals mainly with Tumat Ohalim, right? Which is the Tumah that one encounters when there's a dead body or parts of a dead body in under a roof. Put it that way. That's the simple way of understanding it. And the Mishnah here is dealing with a specific case. And it says as follows: Ha'ishashi maksha leile, a woman who is in the throes of childbirth. We cut the child in her belly and we take it out limb by limb. Because her life has precedence over its life. Meaning, in other words, when do we don't do that willy-nilly, we do that if the birth is presenting such difficulty to the mother that she is in danger of dying. So when she is in danger of dying, we'll do this abortion, even if we have to cut the fetus up limb by limb. Yatsa rubo, but if most of it came out, in other words, if most of the child's body was born, ein nogim bo, then we don't touch it. Shein dochi nefesh mipnei nefesh. We don't push away one life for another life. So the idea is that as long as the baby has not been born, which means, how do we know when it's been born? Either that most of it comes out, or if the head comes out, is considered to be as if most of it came out. We get that from other sources, but it's here. It's mentioned in one of the Perushim here, the Rashi Shas. Yatsa rubo shel vlad, ha'varosh karov evarim. The head is like most of the body, most of the limbs. In any event, I'm not going to go into the details there, but so this is the idea. So this is one of the sources that is cited when speaking about abortion. One of the things you see from here is that when the woman's life is in danger and the child has not yet been born, then you're supposed to perform the abortion. It doesn't say mutar. It doesn't say you're allowed to cut the child up. It says mechatchin, you cut the child up. The mitzvah would be to do the abortion to save the life of the mother. But once the baby is born, meaning again, either the head came out or most of the body came out, then you can't do that because then you have two human beings. At that point, I want to be careful with my language here because it's such a fraught issue in the United States and people are very, maybe not always so careful. But for the purposes of halakha, then you have two competing human beings, and you can't say that the life of one should take precedence over the other. And so then you don't do anything, and whoever survives. Maybe they'll both survive, maybe they'll both die, maybe one of them will survive and one of them won't. So this is not in any sense meant to cover the entire topic of abortion, which is much more complicated and nuanced depending on many other circumstances. And this is one particular circumstance when a woman is at or near term, and if she goes ahead to deliver the baby, she is at risk of dying. So that's that. Anyway, since I brought it up, I thought I would just double back on that for a moment. But for now, let's go back to our subject. So our subject, just a second. So our subject is here in this Gemara about Shiurim, and we're going to go through again this part of the Gemara that we read through last time. So the Gemara here starts Tumat Ochlin Kebeitzah Minala. So earlier we had this discussion about how all shiurim for achila are measured by kazayit, except for Tumat Ochlin and also Yoma Kippurim. So now the Gemara is digressing for a moment on this issue of Tumat Ochlin. How do we know that the shiur for Tumat Ochlin is the size of Beitzah? Where do we learn that from? Amar Rabbi Yovel, Amar Rabbi Elazar. So Rabbi Yovel said in the name of Rabbi Elazar, Damar Krami, Kol ha'ochel asher ye'achel. Right, so this is the pasuk we saw in Vayikra. That's talking about Tumat Ochlin. It said, from all of the food that is eaten. So the words asher yachel are extraneous. So Rabbi Elazar darshans them as follows. He says, Ochel haba mechamat ochel. What does it mean, ochel asher yachel? Food that will be, that is eaten. It means food that comes from food. So what is food that comes from food? That's a chicken egg, because the chicken is food and the egg is food. So then the Gemara challenges it. It says, so I could say a kid. A kid, when it's born, is also food that comes from food. Right? So the Gemara says, Mechusar shchita. When the kid comes out, it's lacking shchita. In other words, it's not ready to eat food, which is unlike the egg, which is ready to eat food. So before we go, we're going to look at Rashi this week. We're going to add in Rashi. But why might we think, in other words, Rabbi Elazar is making this argument that I learned this from the pasuk Mikol ha'ochel asher ye'achel. So why would I think that it would matter whether or not the food is ready to eat or not? Like, why should that be a criterion in making this determination?
If it's not ready to eat, it's not, in a sense, real food yet.
Yeah, okay, you could say that, and I could say that actually this is part of what he implies from the words asher yeachel, mikol ha'ochel asher yeachel. From
Actually, everything's gone mute. I'm not hearing anybody.
we hear you, Michael Schwartz. Do you hear me?
I hear you, I hear Michael.
Okay,
Oh,
actually, I hear now.
oh, now you hear. Okay, it might have just been a blip in the internet.
Yeah.
Um,
Anyway,
okay,
did you hear me?
we heard you,
Okay, well, that's
so it's just the way it is.
just
Okay, so mikol ha'ochel asher yechem. I could say that that's how Rabbi Elazar understands the pasuk, that asher yechel, food, food that is eaten, meaning that the food that comes out from the food has to be something that could be eaten immediately. So even though we don't like to eat raw eggs, but in principle you can eat a raw egg. But you can't eat, and you could eat, I mean, people do eat raw eggs, but usually mixed with other things. Uh, that's a separate discussion. In any event, but what's the thing? But the gdi is mechusar shlita. The gdi is lacking shlita. So when it comes out, it's not yet really food. Rashi here says mechusar shlita kishyatza mitoch ha'ochel shenutzar bo. When it comes out of the food that it was created in, lav ochel mikri linyan tuma. It is not called food for the purposes of tuma. Lohu velo imo, the hamachasre shchita. Neither it nor its mother, because they're both missing shchita. So Rashi goes a step further, let's say a deeper understanding of what the Gemara says, because when we read the Gemara, it says Emagdi mechusar shchita. We answer mechusar shchita. We think we're only talking about the gdi, but we could equally say that the mother that it came out of is also mechusar shchita. In other words, the mother is also not food. Does anybody see a problem though with this, with pointing this out?
I mean, I actually see an additional rationale, which is that if for the first 8 days, it's actually forbidden to slaughter.
That's actually an important point, although um, you know what? I may come back to that. The Mishnah in Chulin deals with that question. You know what? I think we'll look at that in a moment because I'm going to go back and show you again the Mishnah Chulin. But what I mean is this: if the objection is that neither the mother nor the kid are ochel at the time that the kid is born, what will I say about the egg? In other words, Rabbi Elazar wants to say the egg is ochel mitoch ochel. But if the criterion is that everything, both the mother and the child, as it were, have to be ready to eat, well, the chicken isn't ready to eat. It's also mechusar shchita. So it's interesting that Rashi brings this up, that Rashi wants to say that mechusar shchita refers both to the child, both to the gedi and to the mother. But I think we'll see why Rashi says that in a moment. I just wanted to point that out. So, okay. So again, just to keep us centered, what are we trying to learn here? What is Rabbi Elazar trying to prove?
What's the source for the size, the shiur of Tumat Ochel?
Excellent. Okay. So how do we know, or more specifically, the question is asked, how do we know that Tumat Ochlin is measured as a kibetza? So in the previous part of the sugya, we said Tumat Ochlin is an exception to the rule of the size of Ochlin, that all Ochlin is a kazayat, but Tumat Ochlin is kibetza. And so now Rabbi Elazar wants to tell us, so how do I know that it's a kibetza? Granted, I know from the earlier in the Gemara that it's different than other shiurim. But how do I know that it's dafka kibetza? So he says, I learned it from this pasuk in Kol Ochel Asher Yachel. And what does that tell me? Ochel haba mechamat ochel. So it's going to tell me that I have to judge it based on food that comes from other food. So it's the size of food that comes from other food is going to determine the size of tumat ochlin, right? So mikol ochel asher yachel is the din in the Torah that tells me about tumat ochlin, and so I'll say that the Torah is telling me has to be the size of a kibetza because a betza is ochel that comes mitoch ochel, right? The eza ze betza tarnegolin. So then the Gemara says, if your criterion is you have to that I'm going to measure based on food that comes from food, then why didn't I say a gedi? Because gedi is also food that comes from food. So the Gemara says, mechusar shlita. I can't bring and then what? Then the shear for tumat ochlin would be the size of a gedi. So the Gemara says, no, that's not right because I need food that's ready to eat, and the gedi is missing shlita. And Rashi says both the mother and the gedi are missing shlita, so you can't bring a raya from that. The aim of ben kua. So then, so then I can give you an example of a behema where the behema is not missing shlita when it's born. I'll say, what about a ben kua? So what's a ben kua? And Rashi explains, shenimtza b'toch behema shenishchata. The ben kua is the animal that is found inside of an animal that was slaughtered. Because we conclude that the shchita of the mother is mitaher the child that's within her. So if the mother is coming to term, if he is not yet given birth, and you shech the mother, and the child is inside, the child being let's say a calf or a kid, that calf or kid doesn't need shchita for you to eat it. It's not mechusar shlita. Min hadin, and why not? Why doesn't it need shchita?
Well, it doesn't need shita because it's already dead.
Wait, I'm sorry. Hold on 1 second. Okay, say that again.
I mean, unless I misheard you, you were asking why doesn't the fetus within the animal that was slaughtered need shita?
Yeah.
Question: it doesn't need shita because it's already dead.
No, it's alive. The mother was shechted.
Okay.
You have, let's say, a pregnant sheep or pregnant goat or a pregnant cow, and you shech the mother, and then you find that it has a live child inside that had not yet been born.
Yeah.
So it doesn't need shchita. So why would you think it doesn't need shchita? I think I mentioned this last week.
Yeah, it's still considered part of the mother, part of her body.
Right. So kol zman that it hasn't been born, it's ka'evari mo. It's just like another limb of the mother. So just like if you shecht the cow, You don't have to go and shecht a leg of the cow, right? The whole cow got shechted. So all the limbs on all the parts of the animal are shechted. So as long as the fetus inside has not actually been born, it's still part of the mother, so it was shechted, even though paradoxically it's still alive. So Ema ben Pekua. So why didn't I say if your problem is that I can't bring the shear of Tumas Ochlin from a Gdi because when the Gdi is born, it still needs to be shechted. What about a Gdi that's still in its mother's womb at the time that the mother is shechted? And then what? Now I've accomplished both things. In other words, Rashi a moment ago talked about that in the case of the Gdi, neither the mother nor the Gdi are shechted. But now it's effectively that both of them are shechted with the shechita of the mother. Once I shechted the mother, even though the Gedi is still alive, it's effectively shechted. Halachically, it's as if it's been shechted, even though it's still alive. So that's where you see, I think, how Rashi in the previous Dibur Matchil, that's why he talks about both the mother and the child, because here I have it's the other end of that. The other end is if I shech the mother while there's a live fetus inside, then neither the mother nor the child are missing shlita, and therefore what? It is really ochel mitoch ochel. Both of them are as it were ready to eat. But the Gemara says no, it's still not ready to eat because ta'un kriya, it still needs to be torn open. Meaning what? So, and we saw this in the Mishnah. Ta'un kriya didnan kor'o motziet damo. You still have to open it. In other words, now you don't have to shecht it. You can kill it any way you want. Now you can't eat it while it's still alive because that's a separate issue. The Torah forbids you from eating Evra min achai. You can't eat the limb of an animal that's still alive. But you don't have to do a proper shchita on the ben pekua. But what you do have to do is you have to remove its blood because you're also still not allowed to eat the blood. So koro motziat damo, you have to tear it open and remove its blood. And that's apparently why it's called a ben pekua. Pekua from the word paka, which can mean to split. So it's something you have to split open and remove its blood. So anyway, Hajim Kushin Ladukta, our kasha goes back to the beginning, or our challenge now. This challenge has been pushed away, I'll put it that way. So I can't judge the shear of Tumatochin from a Gedi, neither a regular Gedi that was born, nor an irregular Gedi that's a Ben Pekua, because each of them still need at least one more step before I can eat them. So then the Gemara says, okay, in other words, so the Gemara is going to say, fine, let's go with the idea that you have to use an egg. So the egg is maybe the only thing that we can come up with where you have ready food that comes from an animal. And that's the Asher Yachel. So that's the Ocha Abba Mechmat Ocha. So Gemara says, so if it's going to be an egg, so why do you choose a chicken egg? Vema Beitzat Bar Yochani. Why did I say it's the egg of a Bar Yochani? So what's a Bar Yochani? We say, Rashi says, Of Gadolhu. It's a large bird. and we're going to look at this Gemara in a second. Kedamrina v'bchorot, shetava beitzato shishim krachim. Its egg drowned 60 walled cities. So it's not just a big bird, it's a unbelievably large bird whose egg was big enough to drown all these big cities. So the Gemara answers, and the Rashi here has a tikkun girsa, which we'll just leave. The ema beitzak bar yuchani. So the Gemara says tafasta merube lo tafasta. Tafasta muat tafasta. If you grab onto the greater, then you haven't taken hold. But if you grab onto the small, then you've taken hold. So what does the Gemara mean by that?
It would be impossible to follow such a large shiur.
Well, that may be true, but I want to say something more fundamental. What's this idea of tafasta meruba lo tafasta, which I've explained in the past? What does it mean here? It's not that what you... Yeah,
From
go
a
ahead.
statistical point of view, it means that you have an outlier and you shouldn't use an outlier for any measure.
Yeah,
that's true today also.
Yeah, it's a general truth. In other words, when you don't have more specific information, then you have to take whatever the minimum is that you know to be true, and you don't know beyond the minimum if that's true or not. So the minimum is going to be true, so we're going to go with the minimum. You don't go with anything larger than the minimum. The example that I've given in the past, does anybody remember? Michael Schwartz, you're saying?
Yeah, anytime you have a plural, it's two. Yomaim is 2 days, not 3 or 4, because 2 is the minimum. That's all you need.
Right, or Yamim, right? Yomaim is always 2, but Yamim, right? But yes, anytime the Torah speaks about a plural of something, we assume that it means 2, unless we have other specific information. Because a plural is at least 2, but I don't know if it's more than 2. So here the Gemara says, look, it's all very well and good that you have this huge bird, but it doesn't help us because tafasta meruba lo tafasta. I can't hold on to it, so I'm going to go with the minimum shear. So if I'm going to go with the minimum shear, the Gemara says, "Ve'ema biata ditzipurta dizuter tuva." Why don't I say then the egg of a bird that's much smaller? So in other words, if you want to say minimum, so why do I choose the chicken egg? Why don't I choose a hummingbird egg, which is tiny? So actually, that's where this part of the Gemara stops, because Rabbi Elazar doesn't have a reply to that. He doesn't have a reply, so the Gemara just leaves it. In other words, Rabbi Elazar has not proven his case. Rabbi Elazar wanted to show us that I learned the shiur of Tzumat Ochlin from the pasuk of Ochel Asher Yeachel, Mikol Ochel Asher Yeachel, meaning Ochel Haba Mechamat Ochel. And what's Ochel Haba Mechamat Ochel? That would be Beitzat Tarnagolet. And the Gemara ends off by posing this question to him: why do I say Beitzat Tarnagolet? Why don't I just say Beitzat of even a smaller bird? And based on your own argument, because tafasta meruba lo tafasta. So he can't answer that. So he leaves it. So Rabbi Avahu, who brought this ma'amar of Rabbi Elazar, right? Amar Rabbi Avahu, Rabbi Elazar. Now Rabbi Avahu answers the question himself. Rabbi Avahu didei amar. Rabbi Avahu said his own. In other words, he gave his own answer to this question of where do I learn that the shiur of tumat ochlin is the size of a beitzat tarnagolet? He darshans it from the same pasuk. Mikol ha'ochel asher ye'achel, ochel shata ochel bevat achat. So what does it mean? What's ochel that is eaten? It's food that you can eat all at once. V'shiuru chachamim ein beit habliya machzik yoter mibeitzat tarnagolet. Chachamim measured and estimated that that someone's throat cannot hold more than the size of a chicken egg. So if you had to swallow a chicken egg all at once, in theory, you could. And so that's going to be the shiur that's intimated by the pasuk ochel asher ye'achel. It's food that is eaten, meaning that it can be eaten all at once. Rabbi Elazar said it's food that can be eaten immediately without any further preparation. But that argument isn't sustained. Rabbi Aval offers a different drasha, different understanding. And Rashi here says, Rabbi Aval didei amar, piresh, b'mashma'o shel kra perush acher. He explained this pasuk a different way. Shelo pirshu bo Rabbi Elazar Rabo. Shelo piresh bo Rabbi Elazar Rabo. His Rabbi Elazar didn't explain it this way. That's why it's didei. It's his perush. Ve'en lahashiv alav. In there's you can't ask a kasha on Rabbi Aval. There's Rabbi Aval. The Gemara doesn't challenge Rabbi Aval. The Gemara challenged Rabbi Elazar and ultimately couldn't answer for Rabbi Elazar. And with Rabbi Aval, we accept his drasha. Okay. We're going to digress for a moment. I'll show you this Gemara about the Bar Yochani, just because it's really interesting. And you don't see birds like this every day. So
it's a UFO.
It's a what? A UFO?
Mhm.
It might be what was called a rock, ROC.
Yeah. In other words, it's in line with some kind of a mythical bird. Hold on. Wait, it's the Gemara in Bechoros. Here. I'll just show you this because the context of this Gemara it's interesting because it's not the only fabulous story that gets told here. The context of this Gemara has to do with a Mishnah in Chulin also. The Mishnah is here in Bechorot Anun Zayin Amud Aleph. It says, "Hakol nichnasin ladir lihit aser chutz min kilayim u'treifa v'yotzei dofen u'mechusar zman v'hayetom. Ve'ezehu yatom kol shemeta ima o shenishkata v'yachar kach yalda." Rabbi Yoshua mer afilu nishkata ima v'hashalach kayam ein ze yatom. Okay, so just a quick explanation of the Mishnah here. There's a mitzvah in the Torah of Maaser Behema, that every year you take your new crop of behemot, and the 10th one is Mukdash. It's in Masechet Bechorot because the din of Maaser Behema and Bechor are almost identical. So the way you determine the 10th is you put the behemoth into an enclosure, meaning like a fenced off area, and then you have them walk through a gate, and you count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then the one that your stick falls down on the 10th, that's the one that's Maaser Behema. So it says, "Hakol nichnasin ladir litaser." So when you're gathering up your flock to do the Maaser Behema, you put all of them into the deer, all of them into this enclosure, except for kilayim. In other words, if it's not a purebred animal, if it's an animal that was bred with another, a different species, or a treifa, an animal that you know has one of the simanim of treifut, the Yotze Dofen, or an animal that was born by cesarean, what we would call cesarean section. In other words, it was cut out of the mother, it didn't have a vaginal birth. Mechusar Zman, if it's missing time, in other words, what Michael Werner alluded to before, that it's not old enough yet to be brought as a sacrifice, meaning it's not yet 8 days. Ve'ezehu ve'hayatom, and the yatom, the orphan. You can't bring an orphan animal. So what's an orphaned animal? Ezehu yatom, kol shemeta ima o shenishchata v'achar kach yalda. That's any animal where the mother died or it was shechted, and then the kid or whatever was born after the mother died. So then the kid is a yatom. So that you don't is also not part of the count for Maaser Behema. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, afil nishchata ima, v'hashalach kayam ein ze yatom. Rabbi Yeshua says, even if the mother was shechted, but her skin, her hide, is still extant, the shalach is the hide, and then the child is not an orphan. So it's a strange statement. And so to understand the statement, we're going to skip ahead here. And then on the next Amud, B'chorot Nun Zayin Amud Bet, He'ir Rabbi Yishmael ben Satriel, Me'arkat Leveina. So this Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Satriel, who came from a place called Arkat Leveina, he testified Lifnei Rebbe, before Rebbe Yehuda Nasi, and he said, Bimkomenu mafshitin et hameta umalbishin et achai. He says, in our place, we skin the dead one. In other words, we skin the mother that died of an animal that was shechted or that died, that where afterwards there was a live birth of its fetus. So we skin the mother, malbishin et achai. We skin the mother and we put that hide on the birth, on the newly born animal. Amar Rebbe says, Nitkala ta'ama shamishtaten. So he says, now has been revealed the reason for our Mishnah. In other words, what does he mean? That so we said that the yatom is not the yatom is the animal that was born after the mother died, and that doesn't count for Maaser Behema. But Rabbi Yeshua says that if the hide of the mother is still extant, then it's not a yatom. So Rabbi Yishmael ben Satriel is telling what he knows to be true, that if the mother died and the animal is still extant, we skin the mother, we put the hide over the animal, and it makes it like it's not a yatom, because it's still enveloped by the mother. And Rebbe says, now you've explained the Mishnah. Now you've explained what Rabbi Yeshua meant, that if the hide of the mother is still extant, that birth is not the kid that's born from that, or the calf that's born from that, is not considered to be an orphan. Rashi explains, Bimkomenu, right, in our place, Kishabehema meta mechamat leida, when the animal died due to childbirth, mafshitzinota, then we skin it, mabishinota ba'ora. When we cover the child that's being born with the mother's skin. And we cover etachaya, we cover the live one, the havlad, we cover the child. Why? Kadesh yitchamem, so that it will warm up. Ma'ala ki'ilu hayta imo chaya. And it's as if the mother is still alive, right? Because when the child is born, it will snuggle next to the mother. Now the mother is a dead corpse, so it's not going to warm up. But if we put the mother's hide on it, then it's as if the mother, as it were, kept it warm. So it's not truly a yatom. Anyway, that's an interesting tidbit that has nothing to do with our sugya, but I thought as long as we're here, we'll bring it. So why do I start from there? Because Rabbi Yishmael ben Satriel, so he brings this tradition that he had in their place, that malbishina tachai with the hide of the mother. But then he goes on to tell us some other interesting things, and he says, "Chazirin sheb'kamenu yesh lehem shishim ribo klapim." Chazirin here, it's not pigs. It means like chazeret. It's like the lettuces in our place. They have 60,000 leaves. Bebeta masas in its inner inside of it. Bebeta masas shalom. That's one thing, right? So this is another story that he's telling. So he talks about lettuce that has 60,000 leaves. And then he also brings another story. He said, one time a cedar fell in our place. The cedar fell, and it was so large that 16 cars, 16 carriages went over on one of its sides, could pass on one of its sides. So as you see, this is the nature of his stories. He's talking about things that are fantastically huge, like a lettuce that has 60,000 leaves, or a cedar that is wide enough to hold 16 carriages. And then he says, and this is the one we wanted to get to, one time, an egg of a bar yuchani fell, it drowned 60 walled cities, and it broke 300 cedars. So this is one huge egg. Then the Gemara challenges it, not the way you might think, because you might think they challenge it by saying, how could you ever have such a huge bird? But they don't ask that question. They have a different question. Umi shadyale. Would the mother bird throw its egg? In other words, here, this egg, you're saying this egg dropped, but we know that the Bar Yuchani would never give up its egg. And how do we know? Because Haktiv, we have a pasuk in Iyov that says, "Knaf v'na'anim ne'lasa imevra chasida v'notza." So it's a way that, in the way they understand it, is that pasuk in Iyov is actually talking about the Bar Yuchani, and that it implies that the bird will always take care of its young. So Maravashi Hahu Muzar Tahavai. So this particular egg that fell from the Bar Yuchani was not a fertilized egg, it was an unfertilized egg, and that's why it got rid of it. So I see the wide smile on Michael Schwartz. These are, these are the just so stories of the the Gemara. So what's interesting is they're told plain, right? They're just told straight up. So are we supposed to believe them at face value? So not necessarily. They sound like they're quite huge exaggerations. And here the Maharsha in his Hidushei Agadot, he understands them on a, in a more mystical, midrashic kind of way. And I'm not going to go through what he says, but he has explanations for all of these. What's interesting is in our Gemara, back in Yoma, it's brought as if it's an actual thing, right? Because the Gemara challenges the shiur of the Beitzat Tarnagolet by saying, why not a bar yuchni? Why not a huge egg? But even there, I don't have to say that the Gemara there necessarily thought it was a real thing. It just means that we know that there are bigger birds and bigger eggs than a Beitzat Tarnagolet. But nonetheless, it's an interesting thing. Anyway, Tov, so what did we end up with? What's our conclusion here? See if we can snap you back into what we're talking about.
The shiur is a beitzah. That's what seems to make the most sense. So that argument's not rejected.
Right. So it's basically two things. Everybody actually agreed at the beginning of the sugya that the Beitzat Tarnagolet is the shiur. The question was, what was the source? So we're going to end up with the source of Rabbi Yavo says it's Mikol Ochel Sheyachel, but what that means, which was also the source for Rabbi Elazar. But he says what it means is Ochel Shata Ochel Bebatachat. And so now I understand that what determines the size of Tumat Ochlin is the size of something you can put down your throat in one go, in one swallow. Okay. That's basically the end of this part of the sugya, but the Gemara is still going to talk about shiurim. So for the last part of the shiur, we're going to read through the next part here in the Gemara. And the Gemara here says, it says something quite interesting. Rabbi Elazar. So Rabbi Elazar, remember, began the last part of the sugya. So we're also... Yes.
Why is the shiur 1.5 hours? Where does that come from?
Why is the shiur 1.5 hours?
Your shiur.
Oh.
Many shiurim.
So it's funny you say that, because literally a moment ago in my mind I was thinking, should I keep going with this or not? And I think this shiur.
No, I don't pretend you should make it longer or shorter. I ask you, where does it come from?
Well, I can only tell you what goes through my head, because I think when I began this year, I thought it was going to be an hour. But what I find is that in order to explain things to the extent that I want to explain them and still cover, at least one limited area that we're going to cover, it usually takes about an hour and a half. But if you go back to when we first started, I think I was shooting for like an hour and a quarter. And then sometimes it just went on longer. And sometimes, it's gone on more than an hour and a half, because I don't want to leave in the middle of something that's confusing or that's not fully. The shiur I give on Thursdays, I really planned to give it as a 1 hour shiur. It's a little bit more intense. And I've been trying to stick to that, but it's partly because of me. Maybe I don't prepare well enough, and so I can't say things in a succinct enough fashion to get through it that fast. But also, as you see, I repeat a lot, and I do that on purpose because it takes time for these things to sink in. But like when I was in yeshiva, I think our main shiur, I think it was an hour and a half. So it's an interesting. Seems like it's a good amount. But I also wonder sometimes if it's too long. Not just because people get tired, but it's because there's only so much you can cover if you want that information to sink in. You don't want to cover too much in one go. Anyway, Paul, I can't hear you. Paul? תפתח את המיוט.
At university, the shiurim are 1.5 hours. But
Really?
it doesn't have anything to do with the Yochnin or something like this.
Oh, maybe it does. Maybe it does. Anyway, but as far as today goes, this is what I think we'll do, because some of the understanding of the Gemara here is going to be a little bit tricky. So I think what we're going to do is what I started to do the last couple of shiurim. I'm going to read through it without Rashi, and then next week we'll go through it with Rashi. So this is just a basic reading, and this way, one second, Michael Werner is re-entering. This way, if you want to prepare in advance, you'll know that this is the part that we're going to do. And like I say, you can always look at online, you can always look at Steinsaltz, or if you have, I don't know, if you have the art scroll or anything else, you can compare with other sources. Michael Werner, are you back with us?
Yes, I am. I'm using my cell phone now. And once I can
Oh,
get the computer up and running again, I will go back to the computer.
okay. So I think this will take another 10 or 15 minutes. And again, anybody who wants to look at this themselves, to prepare for next time, we're on Daf Pei Amud Aleph in Yoma. So we have another Ma'amar of Rabbi Elazar relating to Shiurim, but not necessarily to the shiur that's relevant either for Tumat Ochlim or for Yom Kippurim or for Ochlim generally, but this is just this is a more sort of general comment about shiurim, which is quite interesting. So Rabbi Elazar says, "Ochel chelev bizman hazeh tzarich shichtov lo shiur, shemi yavo beit din acher v'yarbeh b'shiurim." So he says, if you eat chelev, right? So chelev is the forbidden fatty parts of an animal that you're not allowed to eat, as we discussed many times. In the time of the Beit HaMikdash, the chelev was one of the things that would be burnt on the mizbeach. But afilu bizman hazeh, you're not allowed to eat it. You're allowed to eat shuman and not chelev. They're different kinds of fats. But there, people who know how to do proper butchering, they know which is shuman and which is chelev, and they remove the chelev and they leave the shuman. In any event, if you eat chelev bizman hazeh, meaning after the time that there's no temple, that's bizman hazeh. So you can't bring a korban chatat for having eaten that. So what do? He says, sarich, one second. Sarich shichtov lo shiur. You have to write down the amount that you ate. Why? Shemi yavo beit din acher v'yarbeh b'shiurim. Because maybe another beit din will come and they will increase the shiur. So what does all that mean? What is he trying to say? What does that sound like to you? What's he worried about? What's he trying to say? Or if you don't know what he's trying to say, what don't you understand about what he's saying? If you eat chelev in this day and age, when there's no Beit HaMikdash, you have to write down the shiur, meaning the shiur of how much you ate, because maybe another Beit Din will come and they will make more shiurin or increase the shiurin. So let's see what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, Yeah, Paul, what do you
You
want?
shouldn't eat this chelev milechatchila. I don't know what.
Okay, you're
Does
not
it
allowed
mean?
to, you're not allowed to eat it l'chatchila. That's certainly true. So maybe it's talking about if you ate it b'shogeg.
Shogeg.
Maybe it's a person who ate it b'shogeg, but we're
But
gonna,
if you do b'shogeg, how do you go? Now you write it down. You
so now,
don't even notice that you did it.
but maybe at the time you ate it, you were shogeg. So what does it mean to be shogeg by the chelev? Either that you didn't realize that it was chelev and you only found out afterwards, or when you ate it, you didn't know that chalev was something you're not allowed to eat, and you only found out about it afterwards. Both of those are cases of shogeg. So what's the din if you eat chalev b'shogeg? Let's say bisman beit hamikdash, what would be the din?
You would bring a korban.
You bring a korban chatat. You're not allowed to. The Torah forbids you from eating chalev. So if you eat a shiur of chalev, then you would have to bring a korban chatat. What's the shiur that you would have to eat to be chayav a chatat?
Kabetza.
Why would you say a kibetza?
That's the general. That's the general minimum. That's
Okay.
sort of the generic shiur.
Okay, so that's exactly specifically what we didn't say.
Oh well, excuse me.
What's the generic shiur? What's the common shiur for ochlin?
Oh, kazait.
Kazayit, right? So that's what the Gemara said before, right? That went back too far. That's what we said before at the very beginning of the Samud. Tanya, Rebbe Omer, Koha Shiurin Kulan B'Kazayit. All Shiurin, as Rashi explained, all Shiurin regarding Ochlin are measured by a Kazayit except for Tumat Ochlin. Tumat Ochlin is the exception that it's a Kibetza. And also Yom Kippurim, that's a Kekotevet HaGasan. So now somebody, if you eat Chalev Bisman Hazeh, so what's the idea? You can't bring a korban now because there's no Beit HaMikdash. But what if the Beit HaMikdash is built tomorrow? So then you have a chiyuv to bring it. So Rabbi Elazar says, if you eat chalev bisman hazeh, you have to write down the shear of how much you ate. Because maybe another beitin is going to come and be marbeh b'shiurim. So this is still not entirely clear, but it seems to be alluding to this idea that if you ate chalev b'shogeg bisman hazeh, that you should keep track of what it is that you ate, because in the future you may have an opportunity to bring a korban chatat and get proper kapara. But Gemara asks about Rabbi Elazar Semen, my yarbeh b'shiurin. What does he mean? What's implied by yarbeh b'shiurin? Inema demechayve korban a kazayit katan. If you say that we make somebody chayav korban for a small kazayit, v'hatanya, but here we learn in a braita, asher lo te'asena bishgaga v'ashen. Hashav miyadiyato mevi korban al shigagato. Lo shav miyadiyato ein mevi korban al shigagato. Somebody who does tshuva from his knowledge, from now that he knows that he did something wrong, then he brings a korban for the shgaga that he did. But if he did not do tshuva from something that he knew, based on something that he knew, then you don't bring a korban. Ella, rather, what does it mean? The korban ad ika kazayit gadol. You don't make you chayav a korban until you have a large kazayit. Okay, so all of this is still going to be very unclear, and I'm not going to explain the whole thing, but what I am going to do, I'm going to show you a couple of things that you need to bear in mind as you're learning this part of the sugya. So one of them is a Gemara in Brachot, which I'll bring up in a moment. So, what's the kazayit that we're talking about? In other words, when we say a kazayit ochling, so what kind of kazayit is it? So here from the Gemara and Brachot, Gemara says, "Amar le mi savart kazayit gadol ba'inan, kazayit benoni ba'inan." I think we'll look at this a little bit more next time. But the Gemara here says the kazayit that we're talking about when we're talking about eating, stam ochling, is a kazayit benoni. It's an average size kazayit. It's not an especially large kazayit. As we learn in the Mishnah, Zayit Shamru Lo Katan V'Lo Gadol Elo Benoni V'Zelo Egori. Right, so that's the Mishnah that we saw in Masechet Kelim, where the Mishnah says that the Zayit that Chazal said regarding Shiurim is neither small nor large; it's middle-sized, and it's what they called an egori. That's an egori kazayit. So when our sugya in Yoma is talking about a kazayit stam, it should be based on the Mishnah, based on the fact that the Gemara brings it down in Brachot. The stam kazayit should be this kazayit egori. That's one thing. And the other thing is, let's just take a moment to look at this pasuk of Asher lo te'asena bishgaga, and then I think we'll stop. And again, I'm also going to say, anybody who would like to, you can try to tackle this part of the sugya yourself. I haven't explained it. I've just given you a basic introduction to it and how to read it, but you can push ahead and try to read it yourself. So here let me make sure you see this. So in Vayikra, right, in Perek Daled, we have different parshiot about cases of bringing korban chatat. So one of them is the case of the nasi who has to bring a chatat. Asher nasi yachta, v'yasa achat mikol mitzvot Hashem Elokav, asher lo te'asena bishgaga v'ashem. So when a nasi sins, and he does one of the mitzvahs of the Lord your God that is not done, and he did it bishgaga. In other words, he does something that should not be done, and he does it bishgaga, and he's guilty. Oh, hodai lav chatato asher chataba, or if it was made known to him his sin that he sinned, then eviat korbanos seirizim zachar tamim. Then that his korban is a seirizim, and then it tells you the procedure for bringing it. So the language here is what's interesting to us, What does it mean? Asher lo te'asena. Mikol mitzvot Hashem Elokav asher lo te'asena bishgaga v'yashem. What does all that mean? So the Gemara here darshans that to say if one does tshuva miyadiyato, if you do tshuva based on your knowledge, then you bring a korban for your shgaga. Roshav miyadiyato. If you don't do tshuva from your knowledge, you don't bring a korban for your shgaga. So we'll explain this next time. This is the sugya that we're going to concentrate on next time. And I think this is a good place to stop. And yeah, again, Paul, it's funny that you asked that because I have really been thinking lately that I want to try to consciously make I consciously want to do the shir in about an hour. And then if it goes a little longer, it's okay. But I don't think we have to stuff so much into the hour and a half. Okay. Anyway, I hope everybody will be well and Shalom al Yisrael, Mamash. Or as my friend said today, Mitzapim Yeshua. And Bezrat Hashem, I'll see you next week.
Thanks. Good night.
Bye-bye.